Alright, so when you hear the word urinary system or excretory system, the one word I want to come to your mind when you hear that term is not that. Let's try that again. I want you to think about osmoregulation. Let's see if I can write that up here. There we go. Osmoregulation. Regulating the amount of water and salt in your body. That's what the urinary system is all about. Regulating water-salt balance. Now, it also helps to get rid of waste. And this is something I want to make sure you understand today. We talked about it last time, but I want to focus. One of the things I want to focus on today. One of the other jobs of your urinary system is to get rid of what kind of waste? Nitrogen-containing waste, nitrogenous waste. Where do you usually get those from? Where do you get nitrogenous waste from? Eating what foods? Proteins, meats mostly. Okay? And you also can get them from eating nucleic acids like DNA. Everything you eat has DNA in it, right? And what part of that would give you a nitrogenous waste? Nitrogenous base, right? Like A's, T's, G's, and Z's. Amines, thymines, guanines, and cytosines. So there's different ways that we get rid of those things. And I want to look at a picture here that I've added since the last time. When you eat proteins, you are eating amino acids, right? Before you can do cell respiration on this particular amino acid, your body needs to take off that little group right there. And by the way, what is that little group called? Say again. What's that group? Amino group. What's the COOH group called? Carboxyl. When this gets taken off, this looks a whole lot like an acetyl group, which is the beginning point for what part of cell respiration? An acetyl group. Where Krebs cycle starts. So when you take that off, that opens up a little bind site right here on this nitrogen. And what usually binds in that bind site? What binds right here once this gets broken off from the amino acid? Another hydrogen. And you end up with this, ammonia, which is really toxic stuff. When you eat proteins, your body makes really toxic stuff, ammonia. Something will kill you. That's something floor cleaner and bathroom cleaner and Windex and all that kind of stuff. It's very basic. It's not something you want in your body. So you have to get rid of it. Things that live in the water like fish, like freshwater fish especially, they just urinate all the time and shoot it out. Because they're not worried about what? A fish. They're not worried about dehydrating, so they just urinate all the time. And they just urinate out that ammonia as fast as they make it. It's not a problem. But for us, that's a big deal. Because for us, if we urinated all the time, we're dehydrated. We're not living in the water. So when we make ammonia, it's sent to what organ first? What's the organ in your body that helps to get rid of toxins? The liver. Okay. So in mammals and in amphibians, you need to have that in your notes somewhere. In mammals and in amphibians, the ammonia goes to the liver, where it gets combined with carbon dioxide, another waste that we need to get rid of, and it gets converted into this stuff, urea. Yep. In mammals and amphibians, the ammonia gets sent to the liver, where it gets combined with carbon dioxide and converted into this chemical, urea. Your liver does that because urea is more toxic or less toxic than ammonia. Urea, more toxic or less toxic? Less toxic. It's converted into something a little less toxic, something that your body can keep in it for a while without you having to do what all the time? Without you having to urinate all the time. So it's a way to make it a little less toxic so you can deal with it. It's still water soluble. It has to dissolve in water. So when you urinate, it does still take some water to flush it out, right? But not as much as it takes for this. So this is more toxic This requires lots of water to flush it out of your body. This is how fish get rid of their nitrogenous waste, ammonia. Our ammonia gets sent to our livers, us and amphibians, where it gets combined with CO2, converted to a less toxic chemical, urea, and then flushed out with some water, but not as much water as it takes to get rid of this. Other mammals, specifically, not mammals, but other animals, specifically those that develop in eggs, hard-shelled eggs, can't do this, because that's still water soluble. And if you're in an egg, and you're a baby and you're developing, you're still generating this, right? And if you're inside the egg and it's dissolved in the water inside the egg, what are you going to do to yourself? You got to poison yourself, okay? Can't do that. So they take their ammonia, this is reptiles and birds, and they convert it along with CO2 into this thing. So this is basically made of ammonias and CO2s hooked together in a ring. What's different about this than this, in terms of the way it acts? It's not soluble in wet. It's not soluble in water. It precipitates out. Which means in the egg, it forms a little solid. You guys all know what a precipitate is from chemistry, right? You mix two liquids together and you get this solid that separates itself from the rest of the liquid. So this precipitates out and sort of gets over in the corner of the egg somewhere, and therefore doesn't do what to the baby? Doesn't poison the baby. Also, when they let it out, what is the consistency of it? When a bird or a reptile urinates, it's kind of pasty, right? Which means it's another way to conserve what? Water. Helps them urinate, get rid of their nitrogenous waste without losing a lot of water. That's important to know the differences between those three things. Your ammonia is the way fish get rid of their nitrogenous waste. They have to use lots of water because ammonia is very toxic. They have to get rid of it. Urea, us and amphibians, mammals and amphibians, convert ammonia along with CO2 into urea. It's still water soluble. It's not as toxic as ammonia. We still flush it out with water, but not as much water as fish have to use. Birds and reptiles convert their ammonia into this, uric acid, which is not very water soluble. So inside the amniotic egg, it forms a precipitate, so it doesn't poison the baby. And also when they urinate, it comes out kind of pasty, because it's not very water soluble. It's a way to conserve water. And remember, these nitrogenous wastes are generated when you eat proteins, or when you eat what else? Nucleic acids, like DNA, RNA, those kinds of things, because of those nitrogenous bases. So that's important stuff to know. This is just showing you the same thing, that proteins are broken down by your body into amino acids. The amino group is removed from those amino acids. In fish, they flush out those nitrogenous waste as ammonia. In mammals and most amphibians and a few fish, it gets flushed out as urea. And in birds, insects, most reptiles, it's flushed out as a solid, a paste, uric acid. All right, just the general anatomy of the urinary system. Let's look back at this diagram. You got two kidneys. You got a ureter, which takes the urine from the kidney to the bladder. And then you got a urethra, which takes it out. Don't confuse ureter and urethra, two different things. What did we say this main blood vessel right here is? In red. It's the aorta. It's the highway of blood through your body. It's the biggest what in your body? The biggest artery. Arteries carry blood which way? Away from the heart. On the other hand, the vein, the vessel in blue, is a vein. It's like a two-way highway. Away from the heart, toward the heart. That vein is called the superior vena cava. Hold that thought for a minute. All right, back to what I was saying. Arteries, like the aorta, carry blood away from the heart. What kind of blood usually are they carrying? Oxygenated. And then veins are carrying them back, and they're carrying back usually deoxygenated blood to the heart. That vein is called the inferior vena cava. I said it wrong a second ago, the inferior vena cava. But inferior meaning it's below what? What's that vein below that might be important in the circulatory system? What's sitting right up here somewhere? About the heart, okay? Below the heart, okay? Inferior vena cava. Now, the reason I point out blood vessels is notice that you've got one branch of the aorta going to this kidney, and you've got another branch of the aorta going to the other kidney. What are those two arteries called? They're called renal arteries. Renal. Whenever you see that word, renal, you need to be thinking about kidneys. Renal means kidney.
What did you say the inferior vena cava?
Carries blood back to the heart. After it's already been all over the body, carries it back. So that it can be pumped to where? Where does it need to go before it gets pumped back around? If it's deoxygenated, where does it need to go before it gets pumped back around? The lungs. Okay, that's where it gets your oxygen, right? It needs to go to the lungs first. All right, so again, when you think urinary system, osmoregulation, regulating water balance, getting rid of nitrogenous waste, and also creating this substance, erythropoietin, which causes your bone marrow to make more what? Red blood cells. We talked about urethro in class the last couple of days. Urethro means red. So this causes your body, your bone marrow, to make more red blood cells. It's released by your kidneys. I got pictures. Talk about that. The main thing we want to concentrate on now for the last part of this thing is this structure right here, the nephron. In your kidneys, in each kidney, there's at least 1 million of these things. These are the functional units of your kidneys. They're the parts that do the work. And what is the work of the kidney? Filter the blood. Kidneys are filters. Filter the blood. These are the filters, the nephrons. The nephron is everything in yellow. And again, there are millions of these, at least 1 million in each kidney. Let's talk about the 3 steps involved in making urine. Number 1 step, blood is coming in through this little arteriole, which is just a name for what? An arteriole. It's a branch of, guess what? An artery. Arteries branch into arterioles. Arterioles branch into smaller vessels called capillaries. The capillaries is where all the good stuff happens. Stuff comes into the blood, stuff goes out, gas exchange, nutrient exchange, waste exchange. And then the capillaries start to merge back together. So we got from artery to arteriole to capillary, we're splitting. But then the capillaries merge back into what kind of vessels? Venules. Venules are small what? Small veins. And the venules merge back together to form the veins. It's a closed loop. Because we have what kind of circulatory system? We have a closed circulatory system, as opposed to what like insects have, arthropods. Theirs is what? Open. Theirs is not a loop. Okay? Our vessels are in a loop. So here's the deal. Blood comes in through this little arteriole. It goes into this mass of capillaries you can't see very well in this diagram. Inside this little funnel-like structure is a bed of capillaries called the glomerulus. That's a really important structure. It's a bed of capillaries. Capillaries are known for being leaky, right? That's where stuff can go in and out of the blood. These are especially leaky. So the blood goes into this bed of capillaries and all kinds of stuff leaks out. Anything that's small, anything that's really smaller than a cell leaks out. Water, nutrients, proteins, glucose, waste, it all is filtered out. That is step one of the process of making urine, filtration. And it happens at the glomerulus. All kinds of stuff gets pushed out of the blood there. A lot of that stuff you want to keep. Some of that stuff you want to get rid of. But step one is not about deciding what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. Step one is about filtering. Get stuff out of the blood. Good stuff and bad stuff. Stuff you want to keep, stuff you want to get rid of. It all comes out right here at the glomerulus. And it goes into this yellow structure. Sometimes this is called a renal tubule. The stuff that leaks out of the blood goes into this yellow tube called the renal tubule. But it's all caught by this big funnel. And this big funnel is called the Bowman's capsule. It's in the kidneys. A million of them in each kidney. At least a million of them in each kidney. Renal tubes. But the big funnel-like head on this thing that catches all the stuff that filters out is the Bowman's capsule. And then that leads it into the first part of this tube, which is all twisty. Convoluted might be another word, right? Convoluted just means twisty, curvy. The first part of this tube is called the proximal. What does proximal mean? Close to. In this case, close to the glomerulus. The proximal convoluted tubule. I'm going to throw in the word convoluted because most textbooks will put it there. Proximal convoluted tubule. I'm getting to what it does. I haven't told you what it does yet. So step one of urine formation was filtration. That happened here at this glomerulus. Waste got filtered out of the blood. Some water got filtered out of the blood. Some nutrients got filtered out of the blood. They go into this Bowman's capsule and eventually into this part of the tube, the proximal convoluted tubule and the loop of Henle. Down here, it's called the loop of Henle.
Wait a second. You said it goes into the Bowman's caps, whatever. I thought you said it goes into the renal tubule.
Okay, this whole thing in yellow is the renal tubule. Everything in yellow. The Bowman's capsule is the first part of that. Everything in yellow is the renal tubule. The Bowman's capsule is yellow too, right? So it's the first part of the renal tubule, the beginning. Okay, start over. Blood comes in to this glomerulus. It's inside the Bowman's capsule, right? When the blood hits that, it's got a lot of pressure. So a lot of stuff gets pushed out of the capillaries into that little funnel. Water, salts, nitrogenous wastes like urea. Wastes, that was good English, good English, wasn't it? Waste, like urea. Glucose, amino acids, all kinds of stuff get pushed out of the blood and they leak into this big funnel, Bowman's capsule. From there, since it's a funnel, the stuff is directed into this first part of the tube called the proximal convoluted tubule. There's where step two of urine formation happens. What is step two called? It's called tubular reabsorption. Tubular reabsorption, because it's happening inside the tube. In tubular reabsorption, here's what happens. A lot of that stuff that got filtered out of the blood is stuff you don't want to get rid of. Water. Nutrients like glucose, amino acids. Some things got filtered out of the blood that you want to keep. So in tubular reabsorption, those things get absorbed out of the tube back into where? The blood vessels, which are around it. Most of the water comes back out of that tube by what process? Osmosis. It just moves through the wall of the tube, through the wall of the blood vessels, back into the blood. Osmosis. So most of the water gets reabsorbed by osmosis. But the nutrients, things like glucose, amino acids, potassium, sodium, those things get reabsorbed by active transport, meaning they have to be what? Be pumped, okay? There are little protein pumps, carrier proteins inside this tube that will grab onto those things, glucose, amino acids, potassium ions. And we'll grab those and pump them from the tubule back into the blood. Tubular reabsorption. What?
The proximal convoluted tubule is where all the
Yes. The proximal convoluted tubule is where tubular reabsorption happens, and also this big long U-shaped loop. It's called the loop of Henle. So reabsorption happens in the proximal convoluted tubule and the loop of Henle. Notice how long that is. Long gives you more what? And curvy also gives you more what? Surface area. Where else in your body do you have that same kind of shape for the same kinds of reasons, for absorption? Your small intestines. Your small intestines are all curvy, and inside they've got little hair-like structures on them to make them even more curvy to help you do what? Absorb nutrients from the inside the tube into where? The blood. It's about reabsorption. Wherever you see long and curvy, you need to think about absorption. More surface area for absorption. All right, so now the blood moves into the last part of the tubule over here, the distal convoluted tubule. Distal just means far away. This is step 3. Step 3 is called tubular secretion. Tubular secretion. Let's say you're like me and you've been drinking too much Coca-Cola. What do you have floating around in your blood that you really don't need there? You've got a lot of what ions floating around in your blood? H pluses, right? That's what acids are all about. H plus. More H pluses cause the pH of your blood to what? Go down. H plus acids are low, right? Below 7. So if you drink too much Coke, all these H pluses floating around in your body can make the pH of your blood drop. What's the pH of your blood supposed to be? 7.35. And we said if it goes down to like 7.15, what happens? You die. So your kidneys are also about regulating the pH of your blood. That's another thing they help to regulate. Because in this step, step 3, stuff that's still in the blood that didn't get filtered out, like H plus, can still be gotten rid of. In tubular secretion, waste from the blood vessels are pumped, actively transported directly into this distal convoluted tubule. And mostly the thing you need to know about there is it's H plus. H pluses. So if your blood is too acidic, your body in step number 3, tubular secretion, will pump H pluses from the blood vessels into the tubule, the distal convoluted tubule. In here, by the time the liquid, by the way, what do we call the liquid that got filtered out of the blood? Anything that comes through a filter. What's the liquidy stuff that comes through it called? Called the filtrate. That's a word you need to be familiar with.
They pump H pluses from the blood vessels to
Into the distal convoluted tubule.
and it starts to acidic.
If your blood is too acidic, if it's got too many H pluses in it, the blood vessels in this area will pump H pluses from the blood vessels into the distal convoluted tubule, thus raising blood pH, right? Get rid of H pluses, pH goes up. Add H pluses, pH goes down. That's why if you really, really drink too much Coke, you go to the bathroom, what's it feel like? It burns, because it's acidic. Literally, your urine's acidic. And those are the 3 steps. Okay, filtration over here at the glomerulus, step number 1. Tubular reabsorption in the proximal convoluted tubule and the loop of Henle, that's step 2. And then tubular secretion over here at the distal convoluted tubule, step 3. The stuff that makes it to right here. Now this time it's called what? It's called urine. Remember, there are millions of these little filters, these nephrons, in your kidneys. So all of these eventually dump into these collecting ducts. They dump the urine that they made into these collecting ducts. And eventually, all these will merge together and lead to this area right here inside the kidney. And notice that if those blood vessels were moved out of the way, what would that area look like? It would look like a big funnel. It sort of looks like your pelvis. I'm going to bring in a skeleton. Kristen, will you walk next door to Miss Davis's room and ask her if we can borrow the skeleton? This is about this tall. But it looks like a big funnel. This is called the renal pelvis. That's why it's called the pelvis, because it looks like the pelvis. But it's a funnel. All those little collecting ducts dump their urine into here. And from here, the urine will go into this tube, which is a ureter. And from the ureter, it will go to the bladder. And from the bladder, it will go to the urethra. And from the urethra, it will go out. Okay? That's the general pathway that we talked about to begin with. This is happening constantly. It never stops. How long it would take from you drinking a drink of Coke till it came out, I can't tell you the answer to that. All right, so just a couple other quick things to point out. We said before the nephron is called the functional unit of the kidney. It's where the filtration happens. It helps to regulate the amount of water, salts, glucose, urea, and minerals in your body. So let's put our skeleton up here for a second. No, it's a scaled down version. He's a dwarf. He's not a midget. He's in proportion, right? So if we turn him around this way, let's go back to this picture. You can kind of see maybe how that picture looks sort of like that. Okay, that's why it's called the pelvis, because it looks like the leg bone coming into the pelvis. Leg bone, pelvis, right here. Okay, that's why it's called the pelvis. But it's the renal pelvis, which should tell you it's where. It's in the kidney. Renal. Renal means kidney. So the nephrons are the filters of your body. They do the work. And again, the steps of urine formation, step number 1, filtration. Happens at the glomerulus. And as I said before, most stuff gets filtered out of your blood. Anything that's small comes out of the blood vessels. Anything that's smaller than 60,000 Daltons. Now that's a unit you're probably not very familiar with, but you've heard about it in chemistry. It's another name for those units in the periodic table. Those numbers in red are atomic mass units, right? AMUs. This is the same thing. See? This is an AMU. An AMU is really, really small, right? It's the size of not one atom, one proton, or one neutron. So 60,000 of them is still pretty small. Things that get filtered out of the blood, please, are water, urea, glucose, salts, amino acids, vitamins. Most of that stuff you don't want to urinate out. Most of that stuff's valuable. It's stuff you want to keep. So that's where step 2 comes in. Again, step 2 is tubular reabsorption. This is where the things that got filtered out that you want to keep, you take back. You take back into what? The blood vessels. You take out of the tubule, out of the renal tubule, back into the blood. The things that get taken back are water, mostly by osmosis, like 75% of the water that got filtered out, you take back into your blood. You don't urinate that out. Glucose and certain minerals like potassium get actively transported from the tube back into the blood. And then some things you just let go, like urea. You want to get rid of that. There are some desert animals, like this thing called the kangaroo rat. What part of his nephron is different than yours? because he lives in the desert. Yeah, that loop of Henle that in you is pretty long, but in that rat, proportionally speaking at least, it's way longer, which again gives it way more time to what? Way more surface area for reabsorbing. If he's living in the desert, what does he want to reabsorb? Water. Okay? Gives him way more time to reabsorb water so that he urinates very, very seldomly. And when he does, how does it come out? Pasty. Kind of pasty. Okay, so he keeps the water in his body. What was the loop of Henle?
It's the little thing that goes like this, but what does it do?
Well, it's where reabsorption happens. Reabsorption happens
So
here
it's just part of
and
step 2.
here. It's part of step 2.
Little stretch, that's step 2.
Well, step 2 basically happens right here, the proximal convoluted tubule, and right here, loop of Henle. Over here, the distal convoluted tubule, that's where step 3 happens.
So that looks like a stick.
Pointing to the over here.
All right, now look, I've circled something here I didn't really mean to circle. Let me get exact. This is the proximal convoluted tubule. This is the loop of Henle. Step 2 happens there. Step 3, tubular secretion happens right in there. That's the distal convoluted tubule.
Go stay yellow.
The collecting gun.
What is what now? All right, well, this is when urine is made. It dumps into this collecting duct. This is showing you, this would be another nephron emptying into here. Another nephron emptying into here. Another nephron emptying into here. So remember, there's millions of these in your body. So all those eventually empty into this collecting duct, which is going to lead out. Yes. So this is like different pipes feeding into a bigger pipe. All right. So we talked about filtration. We mentioned reabsorption. And then secretion, step 3, happens in that distal convoluted tubule. And that's where things like H+ get pumped, actively transported straight from the blood vessels into what? Blood vessels to the distal part of the convoluted tubule, the distal part of the renal tubule. And therefore it's going to be sent out. You get rid of H+, what happens to the pH of your blood? You get rid of H+, what happens to the pH? Goes up.
What does distal mean?
Far away. Far away from the first part, the glomerulus. Distal. All right, now a couple other quick things to remember. ADH, something we talked about several times. Antidiuretic hormone, ADH. Made by the hypothalamus, released into the blood by the posterior part of the pituitary. Your body releases ADH when you're starting to dehydrate, when you've been exercising, sweating a lot, when you haven't drank enough water, when you're in the desert. That ADH will go out to the tubules, and it will cause them to reabsorb more water back into the blood. Therefore, how's your urine going to come out? If you're reabsorbing more water, what's your urine going to look like? It's going to be dark, right? But it's helping you to conserve water. Keep water in your blood and not urinate it out. That's an important adaptation to keep you from dehydrating. Whoops, skipped one there. I added a couple things on this last slide. Not every animal has kidneys like we do. There are some of the more primitive animals, like annelids. What were annelids? Somebody said it. Worms, segmented worms, like earthworms. Insects, in phylum Arthropoda, that have similar structures to kidneys but with different names. In annelids, they're called metanephridia. But they do the same thing. They filter the blood. In insects, they're called Malpighian tubules. In crustaceans, what are crustaceans? Like lobsters and crabs and things like that. Not oysters. Lobsters and crabs, they're green glands. In platyhelminthes. What are platyhelminthes? Those are flatworms, like tapeworms. Okay? The little planarian that we saw, the little eyes, little cross eyes. Those have things called flame cells. But regardless, these structures all basically do the same thing as your kidneys. They filter the blood. They help to do osmoregulation, maintain water balance, and get rid of nitrogenous waste. Last couple things I want to mention. Some animals are called osmoconformers. What do you think that would mean, osmoconformer?
Some got water.
They conserve it.
It means whatever the concentration of water is where you're living, what happens to your body? It becomes the same. Those are the kinds of things that can move from salty water to fresh water and back, like some kinds of fish, right? Like the bull shark. There's been bull sharks found close to St. Louis. That's a long way from the ocean, okay? A long way from the ocean. Different kinds of fish, like what kinds of fish go from salt to fresh and back? What kinds of fish are famous for being born in fresh water, living in the ocean, and then coming back to lay their eggs? Trout, salmon, not tuna. Tuna are huge fish. I don't know if you guys realize that or not. Tuna are huge. Tuna might be a scary thing to have in a river. They're big. Okay. Osmoregulators are like us. We regulate very closely our water balance. And if it gets too far out of whack, what happens? We die. Right? We have to regulate our water balance very, very closely. We're osmoregulators. Yep. Too little water can kill you. Too much water can kill you. Here's something you just need to know. One thing they try to do at fraternities sometimes is like an initiation into fraternity. They get these liters of water in a funnel, and they make people that want to get into fraternity just keep funneling water. It's bottle after bottle. Okay? That can kill you. I'm talking about water. Seriously. And that can kill you. Because you get your body fluids out of whack. They become too water laden and it kills you. So don't ever do that. No matter how much you want to be in that fraternity or sorority, don't start funneling water. It can kill you just as bad as the alcohol. Maybe not just as easily, but it can kill you. Okay? No, I'm not saying that. No. Last things. We got to cover this before we go. Some other ways to keep water in, to regulate your water balance. Keratinized skin. Reptiles, birds, and mammals. We all have that protein called keratin that makes our skin waterproof, right? That's what scales are made of in reptiles. Helps us to keep water in. Insects have an exoskeleton made of chitin. It keeps water in them, right? It's waterproof. A lot of animals are nocturnal, like desert animals. Most of them come out at night, right? Snakes and stuff like that. Nocturnal. Keep water in. A lot of animals and plants have vacuoles that store water. Like a camel, for example. They have certain parts of their body that store water. Plants, the biggest part of a plant cell is that big vacuole in the middle, right? Water storage vacuole. The central vacuole. Plant leaves are covered with wax. What do we call that wax? It's called the cuticle. Okay? That acts like a skin for the plants. It helps to keep the water in. Waxy cuticle. And then finally, some animals, especially marine animals and plants, have these things called salt glands. Which if they get too salty inside, what do those glands do? They pump out salt. It's a way to pump out extra salt. And if you pump out extra salt, or in some cases you might be able to pump it in. But typically, they're pumping out salt to keep the salt water balance correct. So these are important adaptations to help keep water in and regulate your water salt balance. Skin with keratin, protein, keratin, waterproof. Exoskeletons, only coming out at night. cells or vacuoles to store water, a cuticle, a waxy coating, and ways to pump outside. Replace the stuff.
We covered all the information.
We did. That was the last slide.
That is
Oh, I'm sure you bring it.